according to Antonio Gouver, you know, the famous Jornado, because there were no bishops coming, there were no priests consecrated either, and finally there remained only one deacon who had to administer the sacraments and celebrate the liturgy. Of course, now there is no, but okay, now we don't need so much the image. So I continue. But in 1490, there was a deacon who later became known as Joseph the Indian, because he was perhaps the first member of this community who visited Europe in 1502. So this Joseph, together with a lay person who was called George, and whom I am identifying with the first archdeacon, George Pakalamattan, who was sent to Gazarta the Bédzsatai, to the Catholic Patriarch Mar Simon IV, to renew the contacts and to bring bishops to India. We have a fantastic Syriac text telling about this, which is called The History of the Blessed Indians and their arrival in Gazarta. I will call it more precisely later. So then both Joseph and George were consecrated to the priesthood, and it's not in that text, but I'm reconstructing it from other texts, that then to accompany the bishops, George Pakalamattan received the rank of the archdeacon. We have to understand that archdeaconate means a different thing in the East Syriac Church and a different thing here in India. In the Syriac Church, the archdeacon was simply a priest who was the closest helper of a bishop. So when bishops were sent to India, from the Syriac perspective, they needed helpers, and basically that was George Pakalamattan. But apparently, the Pakalamattan family had such a high standing in India that they were considered the leaders of the community. So the archdeacon, who was only one, although sometimes there were private archdeacons, and in principle should have come from the Pakalamattan family after that consecration, was the de facto, the real leader of the whole community, while the bishops were only the spiritual leaders. But this was a specific Indian arrangement. I don't say that this function did not exist earlier, but definitively it was not called archdeacon, because we have the documents which say that George Pakalamattan was the first archdeacon. And we can date him and his consecration to 1490. Then two bishops, Mar John and Mar Thoma, were consecrated and came to India. And Mar Thoma returned after that, bringing gifts to the patriarch, and among these gifts was also a slave, because slavery was a quite common feature in the Indian church. And we know about all these stories from Rabban Brahim of Bédzsot, History of the Blessed Indians, and on their arrival in the city of Gazarta, the Bédzsatai, which is extant in several manuscripts, and the real reconstruction of the text is still needed, because there are, how to say, none of the manuscripts is perfect, and the real text should be reconstructed based on the by now known, I think, patriarch, took 3 virtuous nuns from the monastery of Mar Auge. One of them was Rabban David the Tall, whom he made a metropolitan, calling him Mar Yabalala. The second was called Rabban George, whom he made a bishop in the name of Mar Dencha. The third was called Rabban Masud, whom he also made a bishop and called him Mar Jacob. And the aforementioned Mar Thomas, the bishop of India, he consecrated a metropolitan. So he became the metropolitan of Colombo. All of them he ordained in the monastery of Mar John the Egyptian, the blood brother of the holy Mar Achar, which is at the borderland of Gazarta of Zablai, in the year 1814 of the Greeks. That makes 1502, 1503. He sent all these forefathers, Abahata, to the land of India and to the islands of the seas that are between Dabaj, Sindh, and Nasir. Here we see that they were consecrated according to this traditional title of the Indian Republic. They were not sent to China. They were not sent to Indochina or to Sokoto. This was a title. They were sent to India. In the succor of their Lord Christ, but I'm reading. In the succor of their Lord Christ, all 4 of them reached and arrived there in peace and calm, and they met the Indian Bishop Mar John, who was consecrated in 1490, safe and sound. He and all the blessed faithful there were greatly rejoicing upon the arrival of the fathers, the Abahata. After 1 year, they sent a letter to the Catholicos Marelaya. However, before the arrival of the letter, the Catholicos Marelaya had died and was buried in the church of Mescanta of Mosul. Now, here we see that the Syriac connection and the Syriac learning was almost extinct. It became almost extinct just before the arrival of the Portuguese, and it was renewed just after the arrival of the Portuguese. So the letter that the 4 bishops sent to Mar Elia is the first non-Western report about the arrival of the Portuguese. The bishops found the Portuguese very friendly, and they were rejoicing at their might. Later, it is a reconstruction which you will find in a recent publication of my student Sharaya Chandan and myself, which is available online. What happened to these bishops? It was very much unclear. But now we could reconstruct mostly on the basis of Malayalam documents, for which the most important is this inscription of Mutuchira, which we have deciphered anew and published. So we can reconstruct that Mar Thoma became the metropolitan of Colombo, Mar Jacob became the bishop of Cologne, and in between, Mar Yabalala died very soon, and Mar Dencha was the one who was ruling in between. He was basically seated in Kaduthuruthy. And while Mar Thoma and Mar Jacob, who later became metropolitan of Kaduthuruthy after the death of Mar Thoma, were very friendly to the Portuguese, Mar Dencha was the one who first started a kind of resistance. It is clear that among all these learned monks, the most learned was Mar Dencha. He wrote the letter, it's very clear, and he was apparently the second most senior bishop there after Mar Thoma. And it was the tradition of Mar Thoma, of Mar Dencha, who was also interestingly bringing in, according to the tradition, Syriac magic. The Portuguese speak about this, Malayalam sources speak about this, that a kind of magic, namely the book called Perczel by the Portuguese, which is fascinating, the Perczel book, was brought by Mardenka, and it contained all kinds of practices to heal diseases. We have found a fragment from it, and it's called in Malayalam Perczel. So he initiated something which was later followed by Abraham when he came. But I think I have spoken quite long, so I'm just browsing through the rest, which I'm not really presenting. These are somehow the origins. Now the next chapter is Mar Abraham. We have seen that one of the main, if not the main tasks of the bishop was to instill Syriac learning. And at that time, there was Mar Abraham. So from the time of George Pakalmata, this task, which was originally that of the bishop coming from the Middle East, was shared by the bishop and the archdeacon. The archdeacon had to be someone very well versed in Syriac. And we have the Portuguese testimonies after that all the archdeacons were very good in Syriac. So this was a shared task, and they were teaching the local Christians, mostly the priests. Of course, there was no seminary at that time, and also we have it from a Syriac chronicle that Mar Abraham brought to India many books. So I think that the famous list of books that were content at the Synod of Diana later were mostly brought to India, but earlier by Mar Abraham. Now what happened here, I am now summarizing because I don't want to make it any longer. What happened was that there came the Jesuit missionaries and also the Franciscans. And the Franciscans wanted to use the Latin language and convert the Christians into a kind of Latinized Christianity. The Jesuits were more flexible and they wanted to use the vernacular, the Malayalam. But then they were complaining, saying, we learn their language, we give them catechisms, all kinds of texts in their native language, and they don't want it. They only want Syriac. And for this, it was very important that, how to say, the community was impermeable to any mission that was not using the Syriac language. And simply, the Europeans didn't have good Syriacists. And this changed in 1500. This changed in 1584, when a young 25 years old Catalonian Jesuit, Francisco Rose, arrived in Kerala. Apparently, he studied Semitic languages in Valencia, in Spain. He knew already Hebrew and Aramaic. So Alessandro Valiapally, the Jesuit provincial, made him learn Syriac, which he did in Goa and accomplished in an astonishingly short period. He could learn Syriac because he already knew Hebrew and Aramaic. And from that time onward, the culture war was going on between two very erudite men. Mar Abraham, who was a great Nakama, he was much older, and the young Francisco Rose. And while Mar Abraham was ready to make any concession, but to keep the Syriac culture and spirituality, Rose was trying to create a new Catholic literature in Syria, which means that at a time when Syria was already in decline in other places of the world, there was an incredible blossoming of the usage of Syriac in India, where it became the major language of connection, not only between the Middle Eastern mother churches, from which the Portuguese wanted to cut the local Syrian Christians, but also with Europe. So much so that even when that chronicle or letter, what I was speaking about, it was written, it was sent to the Dutch in the early 18th century. Still, the chronicle was written in Malayalam, and it was translated by a radio priest called Valiapally into Syriac, so that the Europeans can read it in a European language, that is to say Syriac. So the Syriac became the common language, the lingua franca, between India and the Middle East, India and Europe. Now very quickly, I am just going through some discoveries, but I'm just listing a Syriac translation of the canons of the third session of the third provincial council of Goa. I have identified the translator. I'm finished. I have identified the translator as Rose. Okay, this is the canons of Diane Perczel. The new liturgy introduced by Rose in Syria with Garshuni Malayalam rubrics and colophons. Slosian statutes. The poem of Rose's best disciple, Chandi Kaduthuruthy, on the Eucharist and the Incarnation, which he sent to Rome. And the accompanying letter, which he wrote in beautiful Syria, which he learned from Rose. His memorable teaching poem on the Hebrew language, a panegyric of his teacher, Francisco Rose, after the death of Rose. And this is my last slide. The beginning of a Syriac Garshuni Malayalam dictionary, early 17th century, the earliest systematic dictionary of the Malayalam language, made by the Jesuits. Again, we could identify that this was made on the Circle of Faith. So, on the one hand, we have a very negative memory about this European intervention. But there is also something else, a cultural blossoming, which happened because of this clash between the traditional Syriac learning here and then grand teachers here, and the Europeans who had to accommodate, to adapt themselves to the local customs and play according to those rules which were the only possible rules of the game. And from this we have an incredibly rich cultural heritage produced by all kinds of later culture, the Syrian Orthodox and so on and so on. All these communities have produced fantastic material which we were collecting and digitizing in the archives, and which we want to publish, and which is completed. And this was produced by your predecessors, so I hope that you will enjoy to study this material. And excuse me if it was a little bit too.
On behalf of all the people, I would like to express our sincere gratitude to you, sir, for your excellent and valuable works and seminar section. Now, we have a discussion section. Everyone can freely ask doubts or questions and express suggestions or remarks. Reverend Father Baiju Matthew Mugalil, Managing Trustee of Dr. Jacob Pillai Education Trust and Professor of Malayalam at BCM College, Kottayam, is here to help us with.
Good afternoon to one and all. We are respected and loving brothers in Christ. We hope to finish the lecture by 4:30. It's almost 4:30. So if you don't mind, we shall extend 15 minutes for the discussions, if you are okay. And you can ask any doubts, clarifications, suggestions, remarks, anything of the sort to our dear Istvan. Okay, it's up to you. Sorry, Dr. Kirsten has already agreed to speak 2 words to us. Can you?
Okay. Thank you very much for your kind invitation. I would like to commend my colleague and friend Istvan Perczel for his lecture, in which so many different discoveries have flown in, made by a larger team that has gathered around him. And at our university, Istvan has been very instrumental in showing how important the Indian dimension, the Indian aspect, is for the history of Christianities. And I'm speaking from my perspective as a scholar of Jewish history, for Judaism as well. And sometimes by looking at these documents that he has discovered and presented and contextualized, one can have the feeling of Shlomo Dov Goitein when he came across these correspondences from India in the Cairo Geniza, when he said, we have here a key document that was so far missing for the explanation of economic and intellectual communication in the Middle Ages. And another feature that I found impressive in his talk is that there is a hidden parallel, it seems to me, between the development of Syrian Christianity in Kerala and the Jewish immigration, insofar as the medieval community of Kudunganur, of Shengli, has been considered as such a model for cultural practices and even for linguistic scholarship. By doing some research on the inscriptions, medieval and modern Hebrew inscriptions here in Kerala, I noticed that this one relic that stays from the Jewish community of medieval Shingli, which is a tombstone displayed in front of the synagogue of Chennamangalam, has been so often copied, and that formulas that are there pop up in different inscription formula, especially in gravestone inscriptions, that the same quotations are taken up until the 20th century. The original tombstone is from the 13th, so that there is a transmission inside the community of 700 years of a model that is taken from this tradition of a community where where the Jews and Christians also had been expelled in the Middle Ages. So that I find it fascinating to think about possible parallels and to research them. So I would like to thank you once again for your interest and for your hospitality.
I'm very happy to answer questions and even objections.